afternoon. My name is Beraha. I am a lead solution architect for CGI's strategy group, part of a public sector group. And in that role, I've had the pleasure of working with some of our largest and most complex public sector clients. Today, it's a distinct privilege to introduce Director Ruth Schwartz, who works for the state of Michigan. And in her role, she oversees the state's Sigma project, a transformational project that state of Michigan undertook about 7 years ago this time. Good afternoon, Ruth.
Good afternoon, Yvonne. It's nice to see you. I'm coming to you from the great state of Michigan. Fortunately, I am not actually at those frozen waterfalls behind us, but I love to show off some of the beauty that our state has to offer. As Yvonne mentioned, I am the director of our Sigma Operations and Support program. I ran our ERP implementation project. I've got about 24 years of experience in state government, senior deputy director within DTMB and director of Sigma Operations and Support.
It is wonderful to have you this afternoon, Ruth. And one of the things that is the theme of this particular conference at NASCA is the notion that 2020 has been a very different year for just about everyone. It has challenged us in personal ways as we made transition to working from home and connecting with our colleagues in a virtual format and our clients. It has challenged us in a professional way, in a profound way, because it really underscored the importance that public sector and public sector servants have in terms of ensuring the continuation of our work and well-being really is there for us. So as we've all made this sort of a transition, it provided some perspective for, I think, everybody in that regard as well. It required the state, local employees to work and adapt a lot quicker in an environment that they were not necessarily accustomed to working from and continuing to serve their constituents. So one of the things that it sort of reminded me of is that the ability to innovate and ability to do things quickly and respond to unforeseen challenges really comes down to two things. How do we prepare, and are we prepared to undertake some of these challenges going ahead? And then from platforms and processes perspective. And then the other element, which is associated with the human element of that. Are we ready to undertake these changes in an agile and quick fashion? And one thing really came to mind, which was the Sigma transformation that I think put the state of Michigan in a right place to tackle challenges, even though, of course, nobody could have foreseen CARES and COVID being a part of that. So I was hoping maybe you could share a little bit with us in terms of how did you create and foster this environment and platform for innovation and change in the state of Michigan?
Sure, that's a great observation, Yvonne, in terms of the ability to take what we do transformationally and apply it to the unexpected and unanticipated. Sigma, which stands for Statewide Integrated Governmental Management Applications, we all have to have an acronym, was formed out of what initially began as Legacy Application Modernization Program, where then Budget Director Nixon was able to attain funding to allow the state to bring our legacy systems into the current century, not just decade in some cases. And Sigma was one of those. It was a project formulated on replacing 24-year-old statewide ERP solution, Maine, as well as 5 or 6 other statewide systems. It very quickly evolved into becoming a business transformational project under then Governor Snyder's 10-point plan to make Michigan the leader in not just the nation, but the world in terms of government operations. So we very quickly shifted from the focus of the project being about technology to the focus of the project being about technology enabling transformation, enabling resiliency. Overall, we kept our objectives at the forefront throughout the life of the project, and those objectives we had 17 separate objectives, but they all boiled down to standardization. Standardization on process, on data, and to the commercial off-the-shelf software that we selected, which is the CGI Advantage solution. Throughout the project, that remained at the forefront. We had strong inclusive governance from the governor through the end users. We had participation in the selection of over 300 agency representatives. We had participation on the governing board of every executive branch agency in the state of Michigan. And we had participation on the project team from the state side of about 75 full-time dedicated state employees who wanted to be part of it. We used a three-legged stool approach to selecting our project team. The first step was the individual wanted to be a part of the team, wanted to be a part of this transformational effort. That was key because, as we all know, these projects take on a life of their own and they take over your life. There are long hours, stressful moments, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into these. So having volunteerism as opposed to voluntoldism was key. Second leg of that stool was we felt they were a fit. They brought the skills, knowledge, dedication, and enthusiasm that we needed. And the third was that their home department was willing to give them up. We fully funded those resources so that the state agencies could temporarily backfill so that we weren't harming the operational needs that needed to occur while the project took place. I give that background because it's important to set the stage for how we accomplished what we did. Standardization in state government, as we all know, is tough. And we were taking 24-plus-year-old systems that had been built, designed, and deployed at an individual siloed agency perspective to standardize. So by way of example, one of the first initiatives was looking at our chart of account structures. And when we analyzed the legacy system data, we found not only no standardization, but no standardization even within individual departments. One of the examples we held up as this change management effort is going to be tough was the coding to identify the location of spend. We found over 17 different chart of account element uses occurring to identify location. What does that mean? You can't standardize reporting. Conversion was going to be tough, and our organizational change management efforts was going to be astronomical. We knew all that going into it, and we're very proud to have accomplished all of the objectives despite the tremendous change management efforts we were undertaking. We're quite proud of the implementation. We believe it to be history making and record setting, on time, under budget, full scope, accomplished. How did we do that with such a massive undertaking? The system replaced our accounting, procurement, time and labor, cost accounting, grant management, budget development systems, and numerous other agency-specific systems. We retired over 60 agency-specific systems as a result of the project, as well as 6 enterprise systems. We had an aggressive timeline, but we had a collaborative partnership aggressive team. At peak, we had over 200 people, state, CGI, and a couple of third-party contractor members on site working collaboratively together. Because of the timeline, we started out waterfall, but we naturally had to shift to agile as the parallel efforts needed to take place to stay on time and under budget. So although during the implementation, we never formally shifted to agile, the work efforts really very much fell through that process, that protocol to stay on track. Stakeholder involvement was key, executive sponsorship was key. All of this set the stage for us to be successful. I mentioned it already, history making, record setting, and in my opinion, I'm a little biased, but the end result was we went live on time, statewide, all functions, all modules with that standardization at the forefront. That set the stage for us to be able to be nimble to whatever might come. Yvonne, you're absolutely right. We did not expect the whatever might come to be a worldwide pandemic, but we shifted seamlessly into remote operations without missing a beat when the time came. And I, in fact, a little personal anecdote, was on vacation on a beautiful tropical island while COVID-19 was hitting the United States. So it was very surreal returning to the States, to Michigan, and it was very rewarding to get back in that state of chaos and find that my entire team had seamlessly shifted to remote work and kept operations up and running to support our 15,000 end users, our 50,000 state employee self-service users, and at the time, our 150,000 active vendor self-service users.
Well, thanks for sharing that perspective, Ruth. It truly is a fantastic endeavor, and we're just delighted to have the opportunity to have that partnership with the state of Michigan and with your team at DTMB and across the state. As you've mentioned, in terms of COVID coming to the shores in the US and in terms of the reaction, as the Congress passed CARES Act into law, there were a lot of things that were very, very fluid. There was obviously a very strong desire from the federal government to help, and realization that they needed to help the states continue running the operations. But there was a lot of fluidity in terms of how they wanted to go about that and what they specifically required. So the general notion from the Treasury was that they wanted to utilize the gates that already existed in terms of grant dissemination, certain infrastructure that is sort of well established between federal and state governments. So that was sort of understood as a goal. But in terms of how the reporting and how the grant are going to be actually managed and reported on, there were certain transitions that happened over the course of the next few months as the things really solidified. So I was thinking maybe you could share a little bit with us in terms of what facilitated that ability to be that fluid and still meet the objectives and meet the standards that were required. Because obviously certain things you already had in place with Sigma, as we discussed, and then certain things needed to be built, and that they needed to be built in a hurry.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. I would start by saying, you know, preceding the Federal CARES Act funding, as was true for everybody, as we were waiting for the federal government to take action and get funding to us, much needed emergency funding, we had to initiate our own. So our legislature did enact emergency funding. And I mention that because it's a precursor to what we did for the CARES Act funding. That emergency funding had to be accounted for, as it does any funding, but specific reporting requirements were enacted associated with that to ensure that the monies were used properly for the emergency needs, for PPE, for first responders, and the like. We were able to immediately, and by immediately I mean within hours, not days, identify the reporting codes to use from a chart of account perspective, build and deploy a business intelligence report to properly capture, collect, and report on that emergency funding that was enacted from the state level. How could we do that? We standardized. That original implementation and standardizing on the chart of account elements meant we were able to immediately say, know, and be certain how our department's using chart of account elements, which ones should we use, which ones will identify the right level of detail and turn that around. So then along came the CARES funding, and we were operating under a perspective of tracking, using that same structure, using those same reportings, anticipating and waiting for the actual reporting requirements from the feds to be promulgated. And as you mentioned, there was a lengthy period of evolving changes, lengthy meaning a few weeks to a couple of months, as opposed to the few hours in which we turned around the initial reporting. As we waited, when the US Treasury issued the reporting requirements, they issued them with virtually no turnaround time. And what we learned was that although we had the structures in place to report on the spend of the data, we were not positioned to report the subrecipient data at the detailed level that the federal government deemed necessary. So we quickly reached out to CGI as well as other partners throughout the state to find the best, fastest, most nimble solution to be able to turn this around. We could have simply used the reporting structures we put in place to capture the spend, but that would have shifted a tremendous burden to our departments to collect and compile and report the subrecipient information. So to give some scope and perspective, state of Michigan had over $3 billion in CARES Act funding to deploy to our local agencies, to individuals in need, to housing development associations, to the Michigan Restaurant Association, and the like, to keep our economy afloat through the pandemic. We had over 140 CARES Act funded grant programs, pushing money out to over 800 local units of government and school districts, literally thousands of businesses, and an exponential number of individuals beyond that. So the idea that we were going to have to collect and compile the information centrally for the subrecipient level reporting had all of our department finance and budget offices in a state of shock and fear, I think would be safe to say. So in reaching out, we found that CGI was already ahead of the game on this and partnering in other locations, I think it was the state of West Virginia, to stand up some web-based data collection tools. The OnQ solution was used in another state in a different way, but we found that it was going to fit our needs. And we, in a matter of weeks, turned around from identifying it was a fit, how to collect the data, designing the forms for data collection and reporting, and deploying it to production successfully. Now, the OnQ solution did not need to be used for 100% of the grants being distributed. Some agencies did have other means. So for example, our school districts already report data in through our Center of Educational Performance Initiatives. And so they were able to continue using that. We also had a large number of the grant funding that could be aggregated, so we didn't need the detailed subrecipient data. But for the vast majority of our local units of government, that tool provided the ability to allow the local units of government to report into the state, enabling the state agencies responsible for those specific programs to verify, compile, and submit to the federal government. So it was really a wonderful partnership, collaborating not just Sigma and CGI, but bringing in our COVID Office of Accountability and Transparency, our Office of Internal Audit Services, our Department of Treasury, and many other agencies to participate directly. Did we have the time to build and develop a project plan and train people on agile methodologies? Absolutely not. But we had it inherent in our operating style by this time. We've been live with Sigma for just over 3 years in terms of full scope statewide at that point. So operationally, organizationally, my team was able to step up to the plate and say, don't worry, we've got this. We'll take lead on the project management component so that our business owners and users could focus on getting the work done. We deployed the Office of Internal Audit Services and our COVID Office of Accountability, deployed weekly webinars using Teams to bring everybody virtually together, which is the world we now live in, to keep folks informed, to keep them on track, to train them, to educate them. Our existing help desk was able to simply add the help desk support for the locals and our state agencies on the OnQ reporting solution. And it all went very seamlessly, very quickly, and very successfully into production. Was it pain-free? No, I would be lying if I were to say it was. So some of the challenges we had, we have the standardization of data and process in Sigma for the core accounting functions and core procurement functions. But relative to our original implementation scope, there were certain functions that were deployed and are in use, but were left optional in terms of containing scope. So the full grant lifecycle management solution in Sigma is used extensively by some agencies and very limited by others. So what did that mean? That meant the data needed to load the subrecipient profiles, is what we labeled them, to get the OnQ connections cleanly in place for the reporting, did not have 100% standardization. So there were some manual efforts that had to go into evaluating and cleansing the data to get it loaded. There were some manual efforts for our Department of Treasury to update some of the data fields from external sources of data. But ultimately, we were able to get that all done. And the good thing about those pain points is we now have an additional hit list for continuous improvement that we can bring into our next Sigma initiatives. The additional item, that was challenging was the ever-changing requirements, right? The requirements came out, they were published, and I think it was 2 days later they were changed, and then a day later or a week later they were changed again. The beauty is with taking an agile methodology, we were able to be resilient to those changes and update and ultimately be very successful in very short order with turning the functionality on.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth, for sharing that perspective and that journey. It certainly speaks to Michigan's ability to adapt and learn, but I think it also talks about some of the things that state has done really, really well in terms of engaging your localities very actively as part of the data transformation process and that standardization process, but also in terms of the outreach and the type of help that the state can offer to the localities. Maybe you could share a little bit with us in terms of how do you foster that type of collaboration, and what is it that you do in Michigan that makes some of this collaboration truly different and unique?
Yeah, so the fostering of the collaboration, I think happens from several levels and several angles or directions. We foster the collaboration by providing solutions. So the Sigma solution, for example, is our statewide ERP. Our local units of government have the ability to use it directly for some components of their procurement processes. So we have those relationships built in relative to use of the system. Our colleges and universities submit their capital outlay requests, for example, directly into the system. So there's an aspect of providing solutions. We have numerous organizations in the state of Michigan that are collaborative between the state and local units of government that help to ensure the relationships exist. And all of our funding that passes through to the local units of government outside of CARES Act, outside of a pandemic, flows through Sigma. So the local units of government were already accustomed to reaching out to our end user support group, our help desk for assistance with, needing to, where is my payment, or I don't understand the remittance advice, or things of that nature. So we had already in place, embedded a natural relationship, call number, email addresses, and things of that nature. And of course, our Department of Treasury also has very strong interactive working relationships with the local units of government because the tax funding in Michigan flows through from the state to the locals. So those are components relative specific to how did we get the locals where they needed to be so quickly. Overall, from the director of Sigma operations and support, I believe passionately in collaboration within and beyond the state of Michigan borders, so to speak. We all learn, we all grow when we share help, when we share information and resources, successes and failures, right? Failures are only failures if you fail to learn from them. So I embed that inherent tendency in my team, in my staff, to reach out and reach across to help each other. And that's how we all are able to succeed.
And that indeed is the true spirit of NASCA. So we definitely appreciate that. Ruth, you shared this wonderful journey over the last 7 years and in terms of the agility that you had to deploy to react to some of the unforeseen circumstances and how we work together to collaborate on that. Tell us maybe about the future direction. What is it that you see that is coming forward? What are some of the opportunities that lie ahead of us, and what are some of the planned activities? And maybe from a personal and professional perspective, what do you feel very excited about in the coming months and years?
Sure. I'm extremely excited that we are actually in the process of the detailed planning for our upgrade to Sigma. We went live statewide with all the functions in October of 2017 and always anticipated we would have a major upgrade in 3 to 4 years. And we are right on track with that. So we initially started planning the upgrade actually a year ago, and understandably everything was put on hold due to the pandemic. So we're really excited to be resuming those activities. So the detailed planning is underway, and our upgrade effort to take Sigma to the Advantage 4 release will occur. The kickoff from an end user, from an agile perspective, will start late March, early April after we complete the detailed planning. That upgrade will take us from a system that is working well, we call it the backbone of state government operations, to improved, tailored usability for our end users. The new release brings us a business role-based paradigm. So without customization to the software, we're going to be able to address any outstanding pain points from an end user perspective, make the system more intuitive, streamlined, and expand on the standardization journey that we began with. I mentioned the learning from the CARES Act examples was, okay, now it is time to tackle some of those grant lifecycle management functions that we allowed more. We called it flexible standardization during the original implementation, right? Let's bring in some of this more increased standardization now that we can. Another example that during the CARES reporting was found was DUNS number was not consistently put on the vendor record, because it's an optional field. So how do we tailor for the vendor records that should have DUNS number? How do we tackle those next levels of standardization? So we do anticipate improved, increased use of some of the optional functions within our upgrade. We are tackling the upgrade in what we're calling a hybrid agile approach. So instead of getting into the middle of the project and realizing, we've got to shift from waterfall to agile, we're starting out agile. We want our end users engaged and participating, and our business owners and stakeholders engaged and participating from day one, seeing the design as it evolves, seeing the hands on the keyboard, participating in the experience where we're improving and knocking down any remaining inefficiencies that exist in the process. So that at the back end, when we get to everything is configured, we have a solid system ready to implement. We will then shift from agile to a more traditional waterfall testing approach to test end-to-end integration, user acceptance testing before going live. Can you do agile without doing that back-end testing? Yes, but in a traditional agile, you're doing that because you're taking small pieces to your production environment incrementally. By necessity from a scope perspective and by necessity from a cost perspective, we will be taking the entire upgrade to production all at once, big bang, all functions, all business roles, all users. We don't feel that we should attempt the risk of doing that without a full integration test on the back end. So we've developed this hybrid approach. We're really excited about moving to that next level for many reasons. One, just the state-of-the-art technologies that are being brought forward are very cool. Lots of nice, robust functionality and bells and whistles, right? DevOps, container platform, all of the things that help ensure the stability and integrity of the system, and more importantly, position us to simply remain current. We are referring to this as our first major upgrade of Sigma and our last major upgrade of Sigma, because beyond this upgrade, we will shift to an agile operations mode. We're on a 4-month cycle. We will be moving improved functionality, product releases from CGI into production every 4 to 8 months, and continuing to streamline and do outreach to increase the participation in some of the optional functions of the system. So we're really excited about it. Also a little nervous, right? My team is, 3 years after the full go live, has a little bit of, breathing room finally, and we are focusing on the project to keep our work-life balance in order during the project. So we've intentionally built an extended timeline. We believe very strongly that this upgrade could occur in a year or so we are expanding the timeline to 27 months in order to ensure that A, we maintain our operational system, because we can't just stop issuing $60 billion of payments every year, and that our team members can maintain the right quality work-life balance. The other thing we're nervous about is we're focusing on the upgrade in a remote world. And so in the background, we're strategizing on how do we replace the things that we would normally brainstorm on a physical whiteboard sitting around a conference table virtually. And in the last year, like all of the others on this conference, we've all developed proficiency in using Teams, Zoom, and other things like that. So we are strategizing on how do we replace those things that really need that more tangible interaction, because we do expect that we're going to be several more months before we're comfortable or safe to be in person. So there's a little bit of anxiety around that, but I'm so confident in my team's ability to tackle really anything that gets thrown their way.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for sharing those perspectives. It truly has been a great pleasure for CGI to be a good partner for the state of Michigan and share this journey with you. So we appreciate your perspectives, and we'll be there for this next transition going forward. Much appreciated. Thank you for this afternoon.
Thanks, Yvonne.